All right. Hello and welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance, the place where we have created a live discussion and community space that incorporates magic, spirituality, and energy, and everything in between. We're coming to you each week with various topics. Join us, get in the comment section, hit that like and subscribe button so you know when we're live, when we're here. Reach out to us even after the show if there's something you want to hear about. But today we are going to talk about ritual and ceremony. I think we have covered this topic previously, but not in depth. And, we want to hold space for what that looks like. I think both ritual and ceremony are used in a lot of different ways now. They're kind of become buzzwords. And what we are talking about may look differently for the average Joe, right? Or Jane, or the average human when it comes down to it. So it's worth defining, it's worth going over. And that's what we're going to be sitting with today. So, grab your drinks, get cozy. I wouldn't say this isn't really like a buckle up kind of topic, but who knows? We'll see where it goes. But I think I'm going to let Katrina do her introduction today first, if this is your first
Oh,
time
wow.
joining us. I know, weird.
I'm Katrina Rasbold. I'm half of Crossroads Occult online, crossroadsoccult.com. And we specialize in handmade magical products, all including hoodoo items, other types of magical products and tools that we make ourselves here at our home. And we also do different services such as cleansings, readings. I do spell work for people. I'm also a published author of around, I think it's 38 or so books. I'm not sure. One of my books actually addresses some of the things we talk about today, and it's called The Art of Ritual. And I'm sure that there are about 170 books out there called The Art of Ritual. So you would probably, if you're going to look it up on Amazon, want to put in The Art of Ritual Raspold, because let me tell you, there are not many Raspolds out there. One of the things specific to the book is it does address ritual in the definitions of performing a ritual that is also a ceremony.
Hmm.
And we'll talk about the differences in ritual and ceremony in a little bit, but there are subtle differences. And sometimes rituals can be ceremonies and ceremonies can be rituals. So that's
Absolutely.
who I am and what I do. I live in Placerville, California, on top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere. And I love it.
Amazing. Um, so
And
I'm
I'm here
stammering
with,
because, what'd you say? Oh,
and I'm
um,
here with.
I'm stammering because me being a big Katrina authorship fan, I have, I think, at least four of your books. Maybe, it seems small in comparison to the 38, but I would say, even Brujeria, and what is the other one? It's got a gray cover. I can see it on my
Crossroads
bookshelf
of
right now.
Conjure.
Yes, like there would be rituals in there to complete for various purposes as well. So rituals, it probably covers the span of a lot of things, where ceremony is a bit more unique, right? But you need to know who I am, so let's go over that part. I'm Dahlia Rose. I am the founder of the Conduit School. I serve my community as a healer, a teacher, a conduit for high vibrational energies. I teach and guide my students with spiritual development, energy work courses, meditation, crystal work, and support. Lots of things. It's one of the things I hear the most. You do a lot. I do a lot. I'm never bored. And ultimately, I'm trying to accomplish the goal of changing the face of healing and the culture of it as well. So, with that, let's dive right in because you have an hour of our time and we want to make it meaningful. So, rituals versus ceremonies, like Katrina was saying in the beginning, there's a lot of overlap. So, I thought we could start with going over what each of those means. That now understanding that Katrina and I both operate as healers and support system for our community. And so I imagine, and we'll find out soon, that there'll be a lot of overlap in our definitions. But one of the things that's amazing about the scope of healing is that it can be so vast that those subtle differences do make a true difference. So for me, I sat with the words because I know myself, I do use them interchangeably. But when I define rituals, I'm looking at something that is it from a mundane sense. It's on repeat. So
Mhm.
a lot of the things that people do in their daily lives are rituals. They're almost like a way to anchor yourself into reality and you know, sort of check boxes. Um, in the mundane sense, where in the energetic sense, it can be a gathering of tools, correspondences, sometimes people for a specific intention to create a shift. And when I say a shift, like a change, healing can be ritualistic. And typically, I define them as shorter than a ceremony. Like they're the quick things that you kind of reach for to affect change. Somebody says, um, I've got a court case tomorrow and I could really use some energetic support. A prayer can involve a ritual, or it could just be the ritual by itself, and you're grabbing candles, things like that. Um, Brown candles in particular. And uh, rituals can be a part of ceremony specifically, and then I like as in terms of things that could happen as examples for a ritual, um lunar work, ancestor work, candle work, most healing sessions. So most of the time when you see somebody advertising um access bars, reiki, integrated energy therapy, stuff like that, where you're going to get the same techniques over and over to create an outcome from a system. I consider those, I would file those under rituals, because again, the consistency, the repeat energy, even though the outcomes may be different every time. Um, Crystal work, visiting certain places ritualistically, uh, and daily routines, and most anything you do on repeat is how I would define rituals. What about you, Katrina?
You know, there is a pretty broad definition for each one of those words, and we have different connotations within those definitions. So a ritual can be a large name for a magical process that we do, or it can be something within the process. So, an example of what I'm going for is we have a graduation ceremony that
Mm-hmm.
happens. And this, of course, is the overarching umbrella of that event that is celebrating and acknowledging and sort of giving this rite of passage power of a certain group of people who have elevated themselves educationally. Um, and so that would be a ceremony that is honoring them. The ritual part would be for me when they throw their hats in the air,
Mm,
because that's something that's done over and over. When they move the tassel to one side, that's something that is tradition that is done over and over. In a wedding ceremony, we have certain things that are ritual to us, even if you have a wedding ceremony of a different faith. A lot of times you still throw the bridal bouquet. A lot of
mhm.
times you still have the bride presented in a veil. You know, there's just different things that are rituals because we as a culture have embraced those things as something that we do. Blowing out a birthday candle is a
Right.
ritual, but it is within a birthday ceremony or celebration. So I see, like you, the rituals as being repetitious is something that we do all the time.
Mhm.
However, that can also encompass year to year. So
Mhm.
my summer solstice ritual for me could be that I get up in the morning and do a sun salutation, and then I have tea, and then I go out and honor the sun as it comes out or up or whatever it might be that, is my ritual. A ceremony to me is something that is a sacred time set aside to honor something.
Mm.
So when you are having ceremony, whether it's a tea ceremony or a chocolate ceremony or a sexual ceremony, whatever it might be, it's stepping out of the mundane world and creating something that is sacred. And that's what I see as a ceremony, is something that you are saying, look, we're going to stop our everyday ordinary life and we're going to do something very special to honor this rite of passage, or to honor this goal that we have, or to honor this deity that we're working with. And so the ceremony to me becomes the event.
Mm.
And ritual is something that we do within the house of that event, or within the little box of that event, to create it and to give it substance and to lift it up in a position of power. So when I use the term ritual and ceremony, it is almost interchangeable for me. When I talk to, say, the people in my coven, it's, hey, we're going to do ritual on Saturday. The ritual is going to be for full moon. So when I say that, they're automatically envisioning certain energies that are going to be in play because we're working with full moon. We're doing ritual on Sunday for Lammas, Brad. They're immediately thinking harvest. So because of the ritual affiliations and associations with what we're doing, the ceremony that we're putting on becomes a ritual, because they know that there is a certain energy tied to that process. So I know that that's a real, like bumper pool kind of jumping around explanation, but it is, I've got to be clear, very difficult for me to explain the differences. When we talk about the difference in witch and Wiccan, that's super easy.
Right.
That's okay. Wiccans are sometimes witches. Wiccans are rarely Wiccans. It's Protestant, Baptist, it's this whole explanation. But with ceremony and ritual, they're both just so precious, and they're both so necessary to our spiritual process and to our mental health.
Mm.
And we can carry that to the extreme, because we have some people with, say, OCD, who ritual is vital to them.
Right.
And I think to a lesser degree, ritual is vital to all of us. We all have to have our little rituals. There's a book that had the best title ever, called Little Altars Everywhere. And it's not a nonfiction. It's a fictional book by Rebecca Wells, and it's about women growing up in the South. But my one of my mentors used to say, every flat surface in your house should be an altar. And
I
I,
like that.
I love that. And so it's an altar to something. What is it? An altar to capitalism? Is it an altar to
To your
education?
keys, to your laundry,
Yes,
to
yes, to an altar to efficiency, an altar to eating and food. What are your altars, and what are you doing with them? And she said that in order specifically to say every part of your house is sacred. Be
Mhm.
very clear about how it is sacred to you. And I'd like to take that idea and kind of blow it up into the idea of ritual, and say that every part of your day is sacred. What is this moment, this hour, this 10 minutes a ritual for?
Hmm.
What is it a ceremony of? I hope that made sense, because it made sense in my head.
It
Uh,
did. It
Sometimes
did.
when it comes out of my face hole, it doesn't make as much sense.
Yeah, it
But
made absolute sense.
yeah, that's kind of, we need to strain together the pearls of ritual and ceremony, even if that ritual is sleeping.
Yeah.
Ceremoniously sleeping, ritualistically sleeping. Isn't that delicious? When you have the incense going, and you've got the fresh, clean sheets on, and you open the windows. There's a little breeze coming through. You say a
Listen,
little prayer, get your angels on all sides of you, and then you just
pass out.
wait.
I had recently made a post on Facebook about the, I'm gonna probably butcher this pronunciation, but the Calla leech for
Oh, the
Imbolc.
Kaliak?
See, told you,
That's
butchered.
okay.
Um,
The Kaliak, the sacred
um,
hag.
yeah, well, I was completely enamored with the story, and so it's when you said sacred sleep, I was like, yeah, like if I wanted to embody, a shorter winter time, I would embrace the energies of the Kaliak and then go to sleep. Like, take all of my things or not do anything that day and invite her, as an energy to remain sleeping or something like that as a ritual. Um, I love what you said about ceremony being creating sacred space. Sandra Ingerman, one of my favorite shamanic authors, talks about that very thing. It's almost like rituals are the keys, and the ceremony is the gateway or the portal to
Oh, I like that. That's
other
great.
the other realms. And so as I think about your questions, what does this aspect of my day, this ritual of my day, what is it trying to accomplish? Um, One that just tickles my productivity gland, and I'm like, yes, I can do that. It's totally feasible. Um, and then taking into account the ceremony piece, it's there can be very special moments carved out for ceremoniously letting go of the day,
Hmm.
especially if you're working in the field of energy work, or, well, I should just say supporting people, right? Like, even if you're working in retail, you need to ceremonially put that put that day on the shelf, or scrub it off in the shower, or whatever it is that you choose to do. I know, with a lot of my clients, we would do like scissor or dagger rituals where you're symbolically cutting things away from you, not having the dagger or the scissors touch your skin, but to cut cords from people in the day. And, maybe you use Epsom salt to wash all that off in the shower. And those were rituals, but bringing conscious words and bringing some sort of feel good switch and expansion from, I'm just going to get rid of it, to I'm going to expand this into my self care routine, almost made it ceremonial. I had a client that would do that at the end of her week, her ceremonial Epsom salt bath at the end of the week, because, things were just so intense. Um, it's I think it's Carolyn Mace. I think I talk about her all the time. You'd think I work for her. Where she talks about, at the end of your day, you say something along the lines of, everything that I've taken on intentionally, I release, and anything that I've taken on unintentionally, I release, and anything I've given out intentionally or unintentionally, I take back. um, and that's good, bad, or indifferent. Your energy having left via words or exertion of your efforts, all of that is brought back to you. And to me, if you're just uttering the words each night, you're looking at a ritual. If you are, okay, I'm going to prepare, I guess that's the difference for me, is like, what level of preparation goes into the moment that makes it more ceremonial, and then are you crossing that veil, creating sort of a portal of energy. So um
I think part of what it's about too, regarding your day and the visualizing your day as a ritual, as your day as a ceremony. For a lot of people, including myself, sometimes that sounds like a lot of work.
the ceremony or the ritual?
Just having your entire day be that,
Oh,
be
oh.
that series of rituals, it sounds aggressive almost. It sounds it sounds like a lot, but it really is about just your presence and your awareness. It's about
Right.
showing up in your day rather than waking up and just having your day be something, oh, I've just got to get through today so that I can just rest tonight. Or life becomes something you have to endure
Mm,
rather than something that you are taking a vital role in creating and celebrating. And that statement comes from a tremendous position of privilege. And I get that. Some people do have lives that all they can do is endure it. However, when we are not in that space, it's almost a waste of our life
mm.
to just wake up, work, sleep, wake up and do it again.
Right. And I think that presence that you're mentioning allows for, maybe you're like, oh, I realize that I'm struggling in this way. Let me reach for this item that I know would be supportive for me. Or
Hmm.
maybe I can walk a different way to, this destination place in my house. There's a lot to be said for presence that can shift things.
So, a
Um,
ritual, speaking of shifting things, a ritual that Eric and I had, and I know I've talked to you about this before, and I'm sure I've brought it up on the show before, is when we were in a very difficult time in our marriage where he had just left the military and the dot-com industry was collapsing, and he was a telecom engineer. And so he kept getting these great jobs and getting laid off. So he'd get a great job, be at it for 2 months, and all of a sudden the company of that's been around for 17 years is now closing down.
mm,
And the last person hired is the first person laid off. And so he just kept getting this series of getting laid off. And at first, we had the very pinballed kind of response of, oh my God, what are we going to do? We have all these kids. This was supposed to be a sure thing, and now it's gone. Panic, panic. We've got to figure something out. We've got to have a plan tonight. We've got to know what to do. So as soon as this showed up unexpectedly, we would have this panic response. And what we started doing instead is it almost became like a joke that he'd gotten laid off again, which isn't, a lot of people would not consider that healthy or realistic to treat it as a joke. But he would call me up and say, well, honey, I found out today. And I'm like, let's go out to eat. And so we would take the last of our money, almost, I mean, a good amount of money, and go have a fine dinner, even though we knew we have rent to pay. Back then, we weren't homeowners yet. We have rent to pay, we have groceries to buy, we have, bills to pay. But in faith, we are going to go have an amazing time. We're going to talk about what could be next,
mm,
and what we want the life to be. We're going to embrace the malleability of this moment, even though we're terrified. And the fear doesn't go away. The fear is still there. You just
right.
have to overshadow the fear with the excitement of, oh, excellent, we're going to go do something fun. And that became our ritual,
Yeah.
was to, all right, well, you got laid off. That means we got to go out to eat. Let's go. And often back then we didn't as much go out to eat as we did in later years. And so it was a real treat. And things began to take a different shape than they did before we employed that ritual, because we came at it from a position of gratitude and optimism and excitement for what's to come, rather than giving into the power of that fear, which is still there.
Right.
It became a proactive choice rather than just getting cast into whatever we feel and whatever comes next. So that was a time you were mentioning, ritual shifts. That was a time when we employed a ritual almost out of what's the worst that could happen? Let's roll the dice and see what happens, and getting a good outcome in order to create a shift. And that shift in awareness and potential really changed how we viewed tragedy and calamity that was everywhere at the time.
I think one of the key things that you said and all of that, or at least the way it feels to me, was the piece about talking about the future. You know what I mean? That's what took it from being sort of reckless and like, oh fuck it kind of thing,
Yeah.
to um you were you invested money that allowed you to have a conversation and to basically alchemize, use alchemy, transmute, um, uh, 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 like completely transition the energy from one thing to another. And then you ate over it, which
Hmm.
in turn, like you're speaking over the food, you're speaking about it around the water. Did you happen to go to the same restaurants, or did
Never.
you change it up?
Whatever we wanted. And that is a key part too. I wrote a book called Goddess in the Kitchen, and it is specifically about the rituals around food. And
Mm-hmm.
we have so many rituals around our food. One of the rituals I really hate, that is, I hate it being gone,
Oh.
is that, no, no, I mean, I hate this ritual that it is gone, is that because I think partially a lot of families eat at different times, but also because of the how can I put it? The interest that a lot of families have in non-Christian options
Hmm.
for spiritual path, we have often lost the ritual of saying grace, or of what in Kentucky we called it returning the thanks,
Oh.
or asking the blessing. And so, I mean, it was when I was growing up, you did not eat food without blessing it first. And often it would be the patriarch or the grandmother or somebody who, the minister, if he was present, she was present, that would give the blessing to the food. But everybody would stop, everybody paused, everybody was quiet, everybody bowed their head, looked at the food, closed their eyes, and asked for their divine figure to bless the food before it went into our bodies. It gave thanks for the people that prepared it, gave thanks for the fact that there was food at all.
Right.
And people don't do that anymore. And I really think that that's very sad.
Yeah, I mean, people, the way that families are set up as far as, like you said, time and belief and all of that. I mean, I know, like, when me and my partner get together and our kids are involved, it's not really like a moment of, coming together and praying over the food. It could be. It's usually my partner praying over his food, and then like everybody else is like nom nom nom. But there is something to be said about coming together over that. And I know I witnessed another individual who wouldn't eat without raking their food. So there's a lot of other kinds of rituals, even just around the setting the intention of this is what we're doing, and thank you to everything that made this moment possible. Those things, like you said, they just don't happen anymore. Um, we have a comment from the audience. Hi, Karen Albeck. Gratitude to me is an example of praying without ceasing. It is a constant awareness rather than a set behavior. Yeah, I mean, I can get behind that. So maybe you're speaking to gratitude not being necessarily a ritual, but something that's constant. I mean, sure. Um, as far as other kinds of rituals and ceremonies, there are other points in life where both are necessary or more conducive. I think that's worth sort of combing out, right? Oh, Eileen had something to say about food as well. It's the disconnection from where our food came from. We lost appreciation because it's always at our disposal. I can get behind that too. And rituals like praying over the food or acknowledging, offering gratitude, things like that, definitely bring you back into that space of like, oh, like Katrina said, this food may not have been possible otherwise. Um, but rituals and ceremonies come in general, less and less frequently, the busier our lives get, the more disconnected in general that we get. So you have things like grief. You have people that are grieving that have been grieving for years that never really got the opportunity to go through maybe a ritual or a ceremony that would have allowed them some sense of stability, balance, peace. You know, uh, a final uh, goodbye, if you will, um, because of jobs. You know, people are too busy in their lives to be able to, you know, uh, be with relatives at that time, or even if they could have been with the relative, they, for instance, you know, maybe they have to go right back to work and they're not really given space and time to settle into their emotions and things like that. And community is missing too. So, you know, you don't have people around you that would have covered what needs to be covered, you know, your house, needing, you know, some additional support or somebody bringing you food and making sure that you're good. Those things don't happen anymore. And I think when I think about the way that community would nurture you previously, if you're in a space of grieving or you're in a transition period, I think about ceremony, like ceremony preparation, and the way that it would be drawn out if somebody was grieving. Or let's say that you're dealing with a mom who is in wow, I'm losing my words all over the place. A mom who is in labor for, you know, 24, 48 hours. There are going to be people around her performing, well, maybe not performing rituals, right? But maybe, and even in the hospital, they're doing things that they're checking off. But they will also be ceremonially kind of coming to check on her and holding space for this new life to come into the world. So there's space for both. And I think trying to figure out in your life, do I need a ceremony? Do I need a ritual for this? There's a lot of overlap, but asking yourself questions like, well, how much energy is needed for what I'm trying to accomplish? That's one way I create that distinction. If I need a lot of energy for the moment, then it's probably closer to a ceremony. If I need a lot of energy, if I'm going to support multiple people, we're probably looking at a ceremony in from my perspective versus a ritual that may be shorter, maybe doesn't require as many people. Again, that's personal perspective. Um, things like that. What are your thoughts on how you distinguish which is needed, Katrina?
I don't know that I've ever actually given that a lot of steam. I just do what I do,
Okay.
and don't really think about a label for it. For me, one of the times when I really had to make a distinction was when I was doing spell work for people on the regular, and I was really just doing smaller things like a little honey pot here to sweeten things up, or um, a candle for this, or a candle for that, a mirror box for this. And I had people that said, "Isn't there something more elaborate that you could do?" And I said, "Well, I could do a ritual for this, meaning a full ritual construct." And they got very excited about that. So that became a part of what I offered to clients, was to do a 2 hour ritual where we brought in different aspects. We burned the specific incense that would be used for this goal. We use different artifacts and different statues and different tools and different types of candles, and it becomes a more elaborate display of time and energy. And I termed that a ritual, as opposed to the tinier ritual of just the spell work that I would do. I do have rituals around that spell work. So when I'm getting ready to do spell work for people, I'm not going to do it without doing some sage work on myself and some Florida water for myself, making sure I'm in the right mindset to do this work for this client. So I have my own personal little rituals that I do within the construct of the ceremony. But Yeah, I don't know that I've ever really distinguished before this conversation the difference in ritual and ceremony. So this is all new to me.
Well, and this is a good place to say, maybe there doesn't need to be a distinction as far as like personal values are concerned. The distinction is a usefulness of communication, right? If you're trying to communicate to, like you said, when you communicate with your coven and you say, well, we're going to do a ritual around this, there are probably some, like, there's a framework in mind versus, you know, if
Mhm.
let's say it's a funeral, right? Which would be an example, I think, of a ceremony. If you say, I'm going to a funeral, there's going to be some expectations
Right.
around the lengthiness of what it is, or like if you're going to a historical reenactment and it's ceremonial, or
Mhm.
holiday events, the sabbats, things like that. So you know much on this show, there's no rules. It's like,
Another thing I would think about, where you were talking about the differences in ceremony and ritual, is ceremony can, I mean, I do believe in my original definition, which was that ceremony is a sacred time that we've set aside to honor something specifically. But it doesn't have to be, um, I don't want to say not have a spiritual significance,
hmm,
but it can be a mundane ceremony. Most people who are having a birthday party for somebody don't assign a spiritual component to that. And yet it's a celebration, it's a ceremony that's happening. Um, Whereas with ritual, we tend to think of that in a more spiritual capacity, unless we're
hmm,
using the mundane interpretation for the word ritual, which is just repeatedly, doing something over and over. I was thinking about, for instance, the way that certain rituals are isolated to specific spiritual paths. For instance, I was raised Protestant Baptist. We don't have christenings.
oh,
That's something that tends toward a very Catholic based idea. Um, so the idea with the christening, of course, is assigning the godparents, and I didn't have godparents growing up. I didn't know anybody who wasn't Catholic who had godparents. um, we just had a whole passel of aunts and uncles and figured somebody would take care of us if worse came to worse, but hoped. But also, the idea of christening becomes about making that child devoted to God and acceptable to get into the kingdom of heaven. And in my upbringing, you had an age of accountability that you reached, and that was when you could decide to be baptized.
mm,
And so kids were considered to be innocent from birth. We didn't really do the whole born with the stain of sin on you kind of thing. But when you were baptized, that was when you joined the church. That was when you made a conscious choice that you were going to be a Christian. And so all of those are rituals and ceremonies, but they can be very different from one another in your expectations of what's going to happen. And some of the ceremonies that are, you were talking about surrounding labor. I worked in labor for 20 years and definitely saw some interesting ceremonies. I do know what a placenta tastes like, as a matter of fact. And some people, we had some people that would, because we did a lot of home births, that
ah,
would take the placenta and put it in a hole and plant a tree on top of it, that then became the child's tree. And some women would labor with a knife under their bed to cut the pain. So, we had a ritual in the United States for a long time that the father was not present for the birth. It
mm,
was a woman's thing, or it was just the doctor was there, and it was all very sterile. Even in medieval times, when the women were churched, they and went into a confinement, there was usually not a man present for the birth, and
right.
men were not allowed to see the women during that last few weeks, or the first, I think, was 40 days afterwards. So we do have a lot of amazing rituals involving birth. That's one of our biggies. And it's sad that we don't have as many for death. I love the death ceremonies that are. Do you remember? Did you ever hear of the sin eaters?
No.
Oh, the sin eaters are bad ass. So this was an Appalachian thing that came over from the Ulsters, the Scotch Irish, and the sin eaters were somebody who lived in the community, and depending on the community you lived in, you may or may not know who the sin eater was. Sometimes they arrived in dark robes and a hood, so you didn't know who it was. But it was somebody that would come in as a person's dying in their home, and they would pay them a certain amount of money
Hmm.
and lay out food on top of the person who's dying, and like on their belly, and the sin eater eats the food. And the idea is that the sin eater is taking on the sins of the person who's dying,
Wow.
so that that person then gets passage through into heaven, without carrying their sins with them. And so, yeah, so the sin eater gets paid, and the sin eater eats well. But the sin eater is, because you make, in theory, the dying person's favorite foods, which has to be hell for the dying person, So like all
Right.
their favorites are
Smelling
right
it
there.
but not getting any.
Yeah, it's like the old joke of the man who's dying and smells chocolate chip cookies and like crawls to the kitchen, and the wife's like, "Leave those alone; they're for the funeral." but, but yeah, so read up on sin eaters. It is a fascinating. Uh, it's a fascinating tradition, and again, very very big in Appalachia, and uh,
I kind of have to side with Eileen here.
it's interesting, man, and different villages did it in different ways, but yeah, this the sin eaters, that was a deal, and then we had in the South, we had funeral food. I don't know how it is done in other places, but when somebody dies, man, you show up with the casserole, you show up with the food. We actually had a recipe that was called death chicken, because it came to so many different funerals and sitting ins and things like that. And it's just, basically chicken over rice cooked in a certain way. And it's almost a whole meal, because you eat chicken, you eat rice, and you're full. So bringing food to death is part of what Southerners do, and it's in theory so that the grieving family doesn't have to cook for themselves, or worry about where the food's going to come from.
I think this is a huge part of nurturing, though. I think what Linda is saying here about becoming disconnected, and these rites of passages. I think I could feel the rites of passage kind of thing in what you were talking about with these Appalachian traditions, and I think that food piece creates the nurturing for somebody to say, okay, I don't have to worry about this. Like, food represents the continuation of life. And so there's so much to be said for when you provide that for a person. That doesn't mean, you show up in a person's house and you're like, take my food. But to not have to worry about where your next meal is coming from is huge.
Yeah.
Still to this day. And I can recall various ceremonies that we did in the shop where food was a very much a part of that. I did a Ishtar ceremony where we were releasing things as we traveled to through the seven gates of hell, releasing things we no longer wanted, releasing things that were holding us back, people, situations, things like that. And it was like a big sweaty mess because we were in one room, seven people. It was hot. I provided no air conditioning. It was supposed to be hell. It probably was. And this was all to represent, Ishtar's tale of going down into hell to rescue her lover, and being trapped there herself for 3 days, which you'll find in the Christian text it's the same as the resurrection story, but it predates that. Go figure. Do your research. Why does it predate the resurrection story? But coming out of all of that said, We had chocolate covered strawberries afterward, and we drank, I think it was like sparkling grape juice or something afterward. And the like ingesting the food and seeing that moment of like, yes, this juicy fruit covered in chocolate and finally something to drink was just, it was such a relieving experience, even though we were in a joyful space. And it's not a funeral. I imagine that same relief energy comes through in
Hmm.
some of those Appalachian traditions.
Well, and the first intimacy, if we're fortunate, that we ever have in our entire life, our first intimacy with another human
Mhm.
is being fed.
Ah, yeah.
And so from the minute that we pop out, basically, we associate being fed with acts of service, love language,
Hmm.
and with feeling safe, and feeling loved and feeling connection with somebody. So when we're born, we have never ever felt hunger before and never been thirsty before. That's a new sensation for a newborn baby.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to do about with it or about it. And so when they're suddenly nursing or getting a bottle, and another person has provided the means for that to go away, it creates that intimate bond between them and that other person. That's why that when you have pets, often they will bond to the person who feeds them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Junk food versus dog food. Yes, this is an ongoing battle in my household. um with that in mind, it also, to me, creates another distinction between ritual and ceremony, right? Is the connection piece. So rituals are definitely a moment where you can create connection. I think ceremony is also like a coming together, a community piece where you now have others either celebrating you or supporting you through your moment, basically. Like I'm kind of visualizing rituals being very individual, even when you do them in groups. Like the group is coming together and each individual is getting, their needs met, versus a ceremony may be more focused on the group supporting an individual. um
I agree. And when we look at things like a retirement ceremony,
mhm,
or even in scouts, when you have your crossing over ceremonies, and again, funerals, births, all of the things that we do have ceremonies for in life. It's about feeling that connection to others, but it's also about feeling that connection to self.
mm,
And sometimes, like I said, it's just about engaging and being present and living that life on purpose. And when Linda was talking about the way that we're disconnected from what they say is making a good life, that really went away when we no longer had the expectation of being financially safe
mm,
without having to exhaust ourselves beyond repair. And when we had the expectation that somebody could be at home to safeguard our rituals, our ceremonies, and um, our protections, basically. Because now that we have situations where everybody in the house basically has to work, because even if mom and dad are the only ones going to work, kids are having to work to
yep,
stay fed, to get to where they need to be, to make sure that they're self motivating on homework and things like that. So, it became work for everybody and work beyond their capacity to give and produce. And when that happens, those rituals are going to fall away because there's no more time, there's no more safety, there's no more security, there's no more home base. There is just a house where producing people of all ages sleep.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of a capitalistic kind of evolution that's happened that has caused us to release those rituals and not have them in our day-to-day life. So, I do think that embracing the rituals and the ceremonies that we do have becomes important. I think that it's important that kids who grow up, move out of the house, honor and maintain some of the ceremonies and rituals that came from their upbringing in their home so that they carry on traditions. But I think they need to create their own rituals and their own ceremonies as well to personalize those. With a religion, we say that a religion that doesn't grow and evolve is a dead religion.
Mm.
And I think it's the same thing with the fabric of families and lineage. If we do not have ceremonies and traditions and rituals that grow and change and develop while still honoring what was before, then that becomes almost a dead family line. It's just people surviving.
Yeah, absolutely. And it to me is directly associated with the increased level of anxiety and depression and like those frayed energies from just going out and working and not acknowledging, okay, you are transitioning from, an adolescent to an adult, or you know now that our rituals and ceremonies sort of circle around public displays, like, okay, you're going to graduate from grade to grade, then you're going to go from high school to college and college into the workforce. These are not things that truly access who we are. They're just ideas. And so you even have people who don't want to go to college have to go through these processes because their parents aren't growing and changing with the times, or they're trying to hold on to the rituals and traditions that came before them that say, my child can only be successful with a college degree, et cetera, et cetera. And it's creating that sort of frayed society. I have seen a small resurgence with spirituality. We're always talking about ones that are we're always talking about spiritual concepts that are a challenge because they are a bit of a mockery or a half-assed attempt at being spiritual or magical. But this one I am pretty excited about. So I've seen women taking their daughters through like a what I think is called like a red tent ceremony whenever they have their first period. I've seen a couple of those crop up across social media, or have seen families make it a point to embrace physical body changes rather than only the changes that take place in, say, grades or grade level. They try to create rituals around the person, or the ceremonies around the person, that lets them know, hey, we've been through this before and we are holding space. We're holding the portal doors open for you so you can kind of go out and sojourn on your path of, cramps and sadness or whatever that looks like for you, and you figure it out, and then you come back and it's not like, oh my gosh, I have to buy tampons now and pads, and we whisper about what this means. It's a full embrace of a cycle. And I've had the privilege of seeing that crop up, and so all is not lost, Linda.
I think we also have to always question the rituals that come down to us and see whether or not those are still applicable
Hmm.
and something that we do want to embrace. And I see in my spiritual path a lot of reconstructionism of people um, recreating old rituals of the past, which is great. I mean, it's interesting to see those, fun to see how they play out. But do they have a place in modern society, and how did they get there? Those are some of the things that we have to look at. Um, when we look at family traditions, I mean, I'm always thinking about the story that I heard where within the family we had a mother, a grandmother, and a daughter who is the daughter is an adult, and so they're having dinner together, and she's preparing a roast, a beef roast, and she cuts off the end, each, an end from each end of the roast, and puts it aside, and puts it in the pan and starts cooking it. And the grandmother says, "What? Why are you wasting this meat? Why did you pull that meat apart?" And she said, "Well, that's what we always do.
Hmm.
Uh, Mom always did that. She always cut the ends off the roast." And I thought that that was like a tithing, or a libating, or a giving back of the roast. And the mom is like, "Well, I did it because your grandmother did it." And she always cut the end off the roast, and I thought it had a flavor component, that if you gave up those ends, that maybe you got to the inside meat. And the mother's like, "No, the pan I cooked it in was too small." So I had to cut off the ends so it fit in the pan. So we have to really think about, okay, what from our childhood memories, where did that come from? Why was that there? And is it applicable to what we're doing now?
Or was it just practical and made sense? This is like you've reminded me a little bit of discussions around cultural appropriation. That reconstructionism piece, people reconstructing what they saw, maybe in a movie or in a documentary or something like that, not really knowing the truth of why it was done. And then this, one of my favorites was when people would come into the shop and be like, "Okay, I need a shell to burn my sage," and I'm like, "Why?" And they're like, "Well, this is what I've seen." And I said, "Well, if you have a sacred mug that says Mondays aren't for me, I think you're gonna be okay." Or, go to Goodwill, or if not that specific, some sort of secondhand store, and get yourself something that's pretty, that won't break with heat, and you now have something to catch your ash, because that is literally what what this is for. And there may have been more significance to the shell and its component and usage in with indigenous people, but don't rip it off just because you saw them hold it, and you have no attachment to it. It's so important to make things your own, and whether you're dealing with ritual or whether you're dealing with ceremony. So, um, takeaways from this conversation: both are important. Ritual and ceremony have a lot of overlap. It isn't necessarily important to define these things as a standard unless you are communicating something to your community, what the needs may be. And some of those definitions may circle around the amount of energy that you have to put into what's being done. Is it an individual slash group experience, or are we coming together to celebrate, or to uplift, or to heal, or to support another individual? And really, both, I love that Katrina brought this up, both allow you to be more present in your life, and to not just shuffle through, because we're here to live, guys, and awareness is important. It's actually key to everything. So with that, we hope you enjoyed the topic of discussion. Would love to hear from you in the comments section. Thank you, everybody who joined: Heidi, Karen, Eileen, Linda. Thank you so much. If we didn't catch your comment, we go back and we check these if you're catching this on the replay. So let us know what rituals or ceremonies look like for you, feel like for you, how you define them. And, let's keep this community going. With all of that said, we'll say goodbye for now, and we'll catch you next time on Crossroads of Cognizance. Bye, everyone.